My name is Sophia Chen, and last Christmas morning, I woke up on a blow-up mattress in my parents' freezing garage, surrounded by paint cans and gardening tools, while my half-sister Madison slept comfortably in what used to be my childhood bedroom. The space heater I'd bought with my own money barely kept the temperature above freezing, and I could hear my family's laughter echoing from the warm house as they opened presents around the tree I wasn't invited to join. What they didn't know was that the man they'd spend the evening mocking as Sophia's imaginary rich boyfriend would arrive in a helicopter before midnight, changing everything forever. Before I continue this story of how my family's cruelty backfired spectacularly, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. Growing up as the only child of Robert and Linda Chen should have meant being the center of their world. But everything changed when I turned 16 and my father's midlife crisis arrived in the form of his 25-year-old secretary, Brianna. The divorce was swift and brutal, with my mother receiving a modest settlement while my father moved into a mansion with his new wife. What made it worse was discovering that Brianna was already pregnant with Madison, meaning my father had been planning his exit from our family long before I knew anything was wrong. Suddenly, I went from being daddy's little girl to an inconvenient reminder of his previous life. The pattern of favoritism began immediately when Madison was born. I'll never forget my 17th birthday, when my father showed up an hour late to dinner with an obviously re-gifted jewelry box from a work event, while posting photos on social media of the elaborate princess party he'd thrown for 3-year-old Madison the same weekend. "Sophie's getting older, she doesn't need all that fuss anymore," he explained to my tearful mother, completely missing how his words cut through me like glass. Even at 17, I understood that his love had conditions, and I was no longer meeting them. When my mother remarried 2 years later to David Morrison, a kind but financially struggling man with his own teenage son Tyler, I thought maybe I'd finally have a real family again. Instead, I discovered that being the outsider was apparently my permanent role. My new stepfather tried to include me, but Tyler immediately claimed the larger bedroom. My mother deferred to David's parenting decisions, and somehow I became the family workhorse while Tyler was treated like the beloved son they'd always wanted. Every family photo, every vacation plan, every dinner conversation revolved around making Tyler comfortable, while my needs became secondary considerations in what was supposedly my own home. The Christmas that would change everything started like all the others had for the past 3 years, with me being systematically excluded from my own family's celebration. I'd driven up from Stanford, where I was finishing my MBA, expecting to sleep in my childhood bedroom as I always had during winter break. Instead, I found Madison's designer luggage spread across my old bed, her clothes hanging in my closet, and my personal belongings shoved into cardboard boxes in the hallway. "Madison's visiting for 2 weeks, and she needs the space," my mother explained matter-of-factly, not meeting my eyes as she folded my childhood quilt into a storage bin. "You can use the fold-out couch in the garage. It's not that cold, and you'll have privacy." The garage where they stored lawn equipment, holiday decorations, and David's forgotten exercise bike was apparently now suitable accommodation for their daughter, while my 13-year-old half-sister enjoyed the bedroom I'd painted myself, complete with the window seat I'd built with my grandfather before he died. Tyler, now 18 and fresh from his first semester at the local community college that my parents were paying for entirely, smirked from the doorway. "Don't worry, Soph, the garage builds character. Maybe you'll finally toughen up out there." He'd never worked a day in his life, failed half his classes, and spent most of his time gaming while I juggled a full course load, 2 part-time jobs, and student loans that kept me awake at night calculating payments. That evening, as the family gathered around the tree for their annual Christmas Eve gift exchange, I sat in the kitchen finishing the dishes from the elaborate dinner I'd helped prepare but barely participated in. Through the doorway, I watched Madison unwrap the latest iPhone, designer clothes, and jewelry that probably cost more than my entire semester's living expenses. Tyler received a new gaming laptop and cash for college expenses he'd likely spend on anything but education. When they finally called me in for my turn, I found a single gift under the tree with my name on it. A generic World's Greatest Daughter mug from the drugstore clearance section, still bearing a $3.99 sticker. "We thought you could use it at school," my mother said brightly, photographing Madison's excited face instead of my reaction. Madison helped pick it out. My 13-year-old half-sister beamed with pride at her thoughtful contribution to my Christmas morning. As the family dispersed to their warm bedrooms, I carried my space heater and sleeping bag to the garage, setting up my temporary bed between the Christmas decoration boxes that held ornaments from my childhood. ornaments now considered too old-fashioned for the family tree. That's when I received the text that would change my trajectory forever. Missing you tonight, darling. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. The helicopter will arrive at 8 p.m. sharp. Alexander. Alexander Blackwood wasn't my boyfriend, though I'd been letting my family believe that story for months to avoid their constant questions about my love life. He was my business partner, mentor, and closest friend, a 32-year-old tech entrepreneur who'd become a billionaire before his 30th birthday, and somehow saw potential in the overworked, underappreciated daughter of a middle-class family. We'd met when I'd pitched a revolutionary app idea for his company's innovation contest, and what started as a professional relationship had evolved into something I couldn't quite define, but treasured beyond anything else in my life. The app I'd developed in my dorm room had become the foundation for a company now worth $50 million, with Alexander as the majority investor and me as the creative director and co-founder. My family knew none of this. They knew I was doing some computer work and dating someone I'd described vaguely as successful, but they'd never bothered to ask for details beyond making jokes about my imaginary rich boyfriend whenever I declined their increasingly rare invitations to family events. That Christmas Eve, lying on the thin mattress in the freezing garage while my family slept comfortably in their beds, I made the decision that would define the rest of my relationship with them. I stopped trying to earn their love and started planning to show them exactly who I'd become despite their indifference. My partnership with Alexander had begun 18 months earlier in the most unlikely way possible, through a desperate last-minute submission to his company's annual Innovation Challenge that I'd entered hoping to win the $5,000 prize to help cover my rising student loan payments. My idea was deceptively simple: an AI-powered app that could predict and prevent small business failures by analyzing spending patterns, market trends, and customer behavior in real time. What I hadn't expected was Alexander himself calling me at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, speaking rapidly about market disruption and scalability before I'd even properly introduced myself. Miss Chen, your algorithm is the most sophisticated predictive model I've seen from someone your age. Are you sure you're just a graduate student? His voice carried the kind of focused intensity that made billion-dollar decisions seem like casual conversations. Our first meeting took place in a small cafe near Stanford's campus, where I'd arrived in my best interview outfit, a Target blazer, and carefully maintained shoes, expecting a brief congratulations and prize check presentation. Instead, Alexander spent 3 hours dissecting my business model, asking questions that revealed he'd studied my submission more thoroughly than most professors reviewed their students' final papers. Your app doesn't just predict business failures, he'd said, leaning forward with excitement that transformed his usually controlled demeanor. It predicts success patterns? Do you understand what that means? When I admitted I'd been focused solely on the prevention aspect, he smiled in a way that suggested I'd just proved his point about my potential. It means you've accidentally created the holy grail of business intelligence software. What happened next changed my life trajectory completely. Instead of a prize check, Alexander offered me a partnership deal that made my head spin. He would provide $2 million in development funding, his company's technical infrastructure, and access to his network of business leaders, while I retained 40% ownership of the intellectual property and served as creative director of our new venture. The app, which we named Foresight Analytics, launched 6 months later to immediate industry attention. Within a year, we had contracts with major corporations, small business chains, and 3 different government agencies. The company's valuation had reached $50 million, making my 40% stake worth $20 million on paper. Though Alexander insisted I think bigger than current valuations. Wealth isn't just about money, Sophia, he'd explained during one of our late-night strategy sessions in his penthouse office. It's about creating systems that generate value independent of your daily efforts. You've built something that will make you financially independent for life, but more importantly, you've proved you can create solutions to problems others don't even recognize yet. Throughout this period of professional success, my family remained blissfully unaware of my transformation. When they asked about my part-time job, I mentioned consulting work and helping a small company with their software. When they noticed I'd stopped asking them for money or stressing about student loans, I attributed it to better budgeting and some freelance income. The truth was that Alexander had insisted on paying me a consulting salary of $15,000 monthly, even during the development phase. More money than I'd ever imagined having access to. I'd used it to pay off my student loans entirely, set up investment accounts, and quietly establish a financial foundation that would support me regardless of what happened with our company. My relationship with Alexander defied easy categorization. He was my business partner, certainly, and my closest confidant. but also something approaching a best friend despite our different backgrounds and the 5-year age gap between us. He came from old money, the kind of family wealth that traced back generations and included senators, federal judges, and CEOs among his relatives, but had rejected the traditional path his family expected in favor of building his own empire through tech innovation. "I understand being underestimated by family," he'd told me during one vulnerable late-night conversation. "My parents thought I was throwing away my Harvard MBA when I turned down a position at my grandfather's investment firm to start my first company. They stopped talking to me for 2 years when I became successful on my own terms, rather than theirs. We spent most weekends together, either working on company strategy or simply enjoying each other's company in ways that felt effortless and natural." Alexander introduced me to experiences I'd never imagined: private art gallery viewings, dinners at restaurants where meals cost more than my family's monthly grocery budget, weekend trips to his family's properties in Napa and Lake Tahoe, where we'd work from scenic terraces overlooking vineyards and mountains. More importantly, he treated me as an intellectual equal in a way no one in my family ever had. When I expressed opinions about market strategy or business development, he listened thoughtfully and often incorporated my suggestions into our company's direction. When I worried about imposter syndrome or feeling out of place in high-stakes business meetings, he reminded me that my ideas had created our success, and my instincts had proven correct repeatedly. By the December when my family relegated me to garage sleeping, I had become someone entirely different from the overlooked daughter they remembered. I owned 40% of a $50 million company, had been featured in 2 business magazines as a rising star in tech innovation, and had been invited to speak at conferences about entrepreneurship and AI development. My personal net worth exceeded $20 million, and my professional reputation was growing in circles my family couldn't even imagine. Yet they still saw me as the struggling graduate student who needed their charity and tolerance, the family disappointment who couldn't quite measure up to Tyler's community college attendance or Madison's teenage achievements. The disconnect between who I'd become and who they believed me to be had grown so vast that I'd stopped trying to bridge it, focusing instead on building a life that would eventually speak for itself. Christmas morning in the garage began with my phone buzzing at 6 a.m. Not with holiday greetings from my family, but with urgent messages from Alexander about a major acquisition offer that had come in overnight. A Fortune 500 company wanted to purchase Foresight Analytics for $85 million, which would make my share worth $34 million after taxes and fees. "We don't have to decide anything today," Alexander texted, "but I wanted you to know that our Christmas just became significantly more interesting. Are you ready for your life to change completely?" The irony wasn't lost on me that the biggest opportunity of my life was arriving while I was literally sleeping with the lawnmower and holiday decorations. I'd spent months preparing for this moment, though not the acquisition offer specifically. I'd been planning what Alexander jokingly called my family revelation, the moment when I would finally show them who I'd become. He'd offered to meet my parents dozens of times, but I'd always declined. Partly from embarrassment about their treatment of me, and partly because I wanted to control how and when the truth emerged. "Your family needs to see you in your element," he'd suggested during our last strategy session before Christmas break, not as their struggling daughter asking for approval, but as the successful woman you've become who no longer needs their validation. We'd discussed various scenarios, but ultimately decided that authentic moments were more powerful than orchestrated reveals. As I showered in the garage's utility sink and dressed in the business casual clothes I'd packed for what I'd hoped would be a normal family visit, I could hear the household awakening for Christmas morning festivities. Madison's excited squeals echoed from the house as she discovered Santa's elaborate display, while Tyler's gaming sound suggested he was already engrossed in his new laptop. My phone rang as I was applying makeup using my compact mirror. "Merry Christmas, darling." Alexander's warm voice filled the cold garage space. "How's the garage accommodation treating you?" I'd texted him about my sleeping arrangements the night before, and his response had been a string of angry emojis followed by, "This ends today." "It's actually clarifying," I replied honestly. Nothing like sleeping next to paint cans to put family dynamics in perspective. We talked for 20 minutes about everything except business: his family's chaotic Christmas morning at their estate, his mother's concern about him working through holidays, his plans to visit his grandmother later in the day. These conversations had become my favorite part of most days, casual intimacy that felt more natural than any relationship I'd experienced. "The helicopter will be there at 8 tonight as planned," he confirmed. "Are you ready for this?" The question carried multiple meanings. Was I ready for the acquisition decision that could make me wealthy beyond anything I'd imagined? Was I ready to finally show my family who I'd become? Was I ready for whatever came next in my relationship with him? "I think so," I replied, watching through the garage window as my family gathered around their Christmas tree. looking like a perfect holiday tableau that somehow had no space for me. It's time they knew the truth anyway. Inside the house, Christmas morning proceeded exactly as I'd expected. Madison opened gift after expensive gift, while my parents documented everything with photos and videos that would later appear on social media with captions about blessed family moments. Tyler received cash, electronics, and promises of continued financial support for his barely attended college courses. When they finally remembered I was there, my mother knocked on the garage door around 10 a.m. "Sophie, we're having Christmas breakfast now if you want to join us." The invitation was extended with the same tone used for offering leftovers to a house guest who'd overstayed their welcome. I entered the kitchen to find the family already eating the elaborate spread my mother had prepared: fresh pastries, fruit arrangements, expensive coffee, while discussing their plans for the day. "Madison wants to try her new art supplies this afternoon," my mother announced, "and Tyler's friends are coming over to see his new setup. It'll be a full house." The implication was clear. I should make myself scarce during the important family activities. This was exactly the kind of dismissal that had shaped my entire adolescence. But now it felt almost amusing rather than hurtful. They had no idea they were casually excluding someone who would soon make a decision about whether to accept a deal that would make her wealthier than their entire extended family combined. "Actually," I said, buttering a piece of toast with careful precision, "I have someone coming to visit tonight. I hope that's okay." My mother looked surprised. Visits from my friends had never been common, partly because I'd been too embarrassed by my family's treatment of me to expose others to it. "Of course, dear," David said kindly, though I noticed my mother's slight frown. "What time?" "We should probably plan dinner accordingly," Tyler snorted from across the table. "Is it the imaginary rich boyfriend again?" The mockery in his voice was reflexive, the kind of casual cruelty he'd perfected over years of being the favored child. "He should be here around 8, I replied evenly, ignoring Tyler's smirk. "He's flying in specially for Christmas." Madison looked up from her new tablet with interest. "Flying? Like on a plane?" Her question was innocent, but it drew everyone's attention to my response. "Something like that," I said with a small smile. "You'll see." The dismissive looks exchanged between my parents and Tyler were predictable. To them, I was the family member who exaggerated, who lived in fantasies about success and relationships that never quite materialized in reality. As the day progressed, I retreated to the garage periodically to handle business calls related to the acquisition offer, speaking quietly while my family enjoyed their holiday activities inside the warm house. The irony of negotiating multi-million-dollar decisions while sitting next to Christmas decorations in a freezing garage wasn't lost on me. By evening, I'd made my decision about the acquisition offer. I'd also finalized plans with Alexander that would transform this Christmas from a familiar pattern of family disappointment into something none of us would ever forget. At 7:45 p.m., as my family settled into their traditional Christmas evening routine of watching holiday movies in the living room, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors began echoing across the suburban neighborhood. At first, everyone assumed it was emergency services or perhaps news coverage of some local incident. But as the sound grew louder and closer, conversations began stopping mid-sentence. "That's really close," David observed, muting the television as the noise became impossible to ignore. Through the front windows, we could see neighbors emerging from their houses, looking up at the sky with curiosity and concern. Tyler paused his new video game, and even Madison looked up from her tablet as the mechanical thunder grew overwhelming. I checked my phone casually. "That would be Alexander," I announced to the suddenly silent room. "He said 8 o'clock, but he's usually a few minutes early." 4 sets of eyes turned toward me with expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief as the helicopter sound reached its peak directly overhead. "Sophia," my mother said slowly, "what exactly do you mean by that?" Outside, the wind from rotor wash was bending trees and scattering loose debris across the yard as the aircraft settled onto the large open space behind our house that normally served as an informal neighborhood gathering area. "I mean, my boyfriend is here," I replied simply, standing and smoothing my sweater. "I should go meet him." Through the back windows, we could all see the sleek black helicopter touching down, its elegant design and obvious expense making it clear this wasn't some charter service or emergency vehicle. Tyler's game controller clattered to the floor. "Are you serious right now?" His voice cracked slightly, the cocky teenager suddenly sounding much younger. Madison pressed her face against the window, eyes wide with amazement at the aircraft that had just landed in her backyard. As the rotors wound down, a figure emerged from the helicopter's passenger compartment. Even from a distance, Alexander's presence was unmistakable. Tall, confident, wearing what I recognized as his custom-tailored winter coat that probably cost more than Tyler's entire wardrobe. He moved with the easy assurance of someone accustomed to making dramatic entrances. "Oh my God," my mother whispered, her face pale as she watched this elegant stranger cross our modest backyard as if he owned the entire neighborhood. "Sophia, who is this person?" For the first time in years, her attention was completely focused on me, though her expression showed panic rather than interest. I opened the back door as Alexander approached, his smile warm and genuine despite the awkward circumstances. "Merry Christmas, darling," he said, pulling me into an embrace that felt natural and comfortable despite my family's shocked stares from the windows. "Sorry I'm a few minutes late. Air traffic control had some questions about our flight plan." "Perfectly on time," I replied, gesturing toward the house. "Are you ready to meet the family?" His answering grin was both charming and slightly predatory, the expression of someone who'd built a business empire by turning awkward situations to his advantage. We entered through the back door into a living room that had become completely silent except for the quiet hum of abandoned electronics. My family stood frozen in tableau, David half risen from his recliner, my mother clutching the remote control like a lifeline, Tyler's mouth hanging open in complete shock, and Madison staring with the unguarded fascination of a 13-year-old meeting her first real-life celebrity. "Alexander Blackwood," he said warmly, extending his hand to David first with the kind of natural politeness that comes from years of high-stakes social situations. "It's wonderful to finally meet Sophia's family. She talks about you all constantly." The lie was delivered with such sincere charm that I almost believed it myself. David, to his credit, recovered first and shook Alexander's hand. "David Morrison, Sophia's stepfather. This is quite an entrance." His tone held cautious respect rather than judgment, though I could see him trying to process how his struggling stepdaughter had connected with someone who traveled by private helicopter. "Linda Chen," my mother managed, accepting Alexander's handshake with obvious nervousness. "Sophia's mother. We had no idea. That is, she never mentioned." She trailed off, clearly struggling with how to complete the sentence without revealing how little they actually knew about my life. Tyler remained speechless, staring at Alexander with the expression of someone whose entire worldview was undergoing rapid reconstruction. Madison, however, had no such social constraints. "Is that your helicopter?" she asked directly, pointing toward the back windows where the aircraft sat gleaming under the outdoor lights. "One of them," Alexander replied with gentle humor. This seemed like the most practical way to visit for Christmas evening. Sophia mentioned how important family time is during the holidays. His casual reference to owning multiple helicopters landed with appropriate impact, while his emphasis on family time subtly highlighted my current garage sleeping arrangements. "Please, sit down," my mother said, gesturing frantically toward the sofa as if entertaining helicopter-owning visitors was part of her normal holiday routine. "Can I get you something to drink? Coffee? Wine?" The hospitality was genuine, but edged with desperation as she tried to process this complete disruption of her understanding of our family dynamics. As Alexander settled comfortably onto the couch, I noticed him taking in the room's details. The modest but well-maintained furniture, the carefully arranged Christmas decorations, the pile of Madison's new gifts still scattered around the tree. His expression remained pleasantly neutral, but I knew him well enough to recognize the calculating assessment behind his smile. "Your home is lovely," he told my mother with apparent sincerity. "Sophia's told me so much about your family traditions. Christmas has always been such an important time for her." The statement was technically true, though probably not in the way my family would interpret it. Tyler finally found his voice. "So you're like, rich?" The question was blunt with teenage directness, earning an embarrassed look from David and a mortified gasp from my mother. Alexander chuckled good-naturedly. "I've been fortunate in business, yes. Your sister is actually responsible for much of my recent success." He turned to me with unmistakable pride and affection. "Her innovations in predictive analytics have revolutionized how we approach market forecasting." The room went silent again as my family processed this information. I could see confusion on their faces. The same daughter they'd relegated to garage sleeping was apparently involved in sophisticated business ventures with someone who spoke casually about market forecasting and owned multiple helicopters. "Innovations?" my mother repeated slowly. "Sophia, what exactly do you do with Alexander's company?" For the first time, she was asking about my professional life with genuine interest rather than polite dismissal. "We're business partners," I explained simply. "I developed an AI application that predicts business success and failure patterns. Alexander provided the funding and infrastructure to bring it to market." I kept my tone matter-of-fact, though I could see the information hitting my family like a series of small explosions. Alexander nodded approvingly. "She's being modest," Sophia created the most sophisticated predictive algorithm I'd ever seen, then built a company around it that's now worth. He paused, glancing at me with a questioning look. $85 million as of this morning. I finished quietly. We received an acquisition offer today. The number hung in the air like a physical presence, too large and unexpected for my family to immediately comprehend. Tyler's new gaming laptop suddenly seemed less impressive. Madison's pile of Christmas presents appeared smaller. My mother's hand went to her throat as she stared at me with complete bewilderment. 85 million? David repeated carefully, as if testing whether the words would make more sense when spoken aloud. And you own 40%. Alexander supplied helpfully, which makes Sophia's share worth approximately $34 million after taxes and fees, assuming we accept the offer, of course. The silence that followed Alexander's casual mention of my $34 million stake stretched so long that the house's heating system cycling on sounded thunderous. I watched my family's faces cycle through disbelief, shock, and dawning realization that everything they thought they knew about me was fundamentally wrong. My mother was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. $34 million. She looked around the room as if searching for hidden cameras or some indication that this was an elaborate prank. Sophia, how is this possible? When did this happen? Over the past 18 months. I replied evenly. The company has been growing steadily since we launched. I've been meaning to tell you about it, but the opportunity never seemed to arise. The diplomatic phrasing couldn't quite mask the truth, that they'd never bothered to ask meaningful questions about my life. Tyler finally closed his mouth, though his expression remained stunned. Wait, he said slowly. If you're worth that much money, why didn't you say anything? Why are you sleeping in the garage? The question revealed his complete failure to understand the dynamics that had led to this moment. Alexander's eyebrows rose slightly. The garage? He turned to me with concern that was clearly genuine. Darling, you didn't mention anything about sleeping arrangements when we spoke this morning. His use of the endearment, casual and natural, wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Madison needed my old bedroom for her visit, I explained simply. It wasn't a big deal. The words sounded hollow even to me, especially given the context of my newly revealed financial status. It's a very big deal, Alexander said firmly, his tone carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. He turned to my parents with polite but unmistakable disapproval. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. Someone of Sophia's accomplishments shouldn't be sleeping in a garage during family visits. The rebuke was gentle but devastating, highlighting the absurdity of their treatment without direct accusation. My mother's face flushed deep red as she realized how their family dynamics appeared to an outsider, especially an outsider worth more than most small countries' annual budgets. We didn't know, she said weakly. Sophia never told us about her business success. We thought she was still struggling with student loans and part-time work. The excuse revealed how little attention they'd paid to my life over the past year and a half. Perhaps that's because she was never asked. Alexander observed with gentle precision. Sophia tells me she's been quite busy building something extraordinary while finishing her MBA. That takes remarkable dedication and intelligence. His praise was simple but powerful, highlighting achievements my family had never acknowledged. Madison, still processing the helicopter in her backyard and the revelation about her mysterious half-sister's secret fortune, asked the question that cut to the heart of the matter. Sophia, does this mean you're famous? Like, really famous? Her teenage understanding of wealth was limited, but her instinct for significance was accurate. She's becoming quite well known in business circles, Alexander answered when I hesitated. 2 magazine profiles this year, 3 conference keynote speeches, and now this acquisition offer. Sophia's work is reshaping how companies approach market prediction. Each achievement he listed was news to my family. Professional accomplishments they'd never heard about because they'd never asked and I'd stopped sharing. The accumulation of success stories painted a picture of someone who'd outgrown her childhood circumstances, while her family remained fixated on outdated perceptions. David, clearly struggling to recalibrate his understanding of family dynamics, asked tentatively, Sophia, why didn't you tell us about any of this? We're your family. We should have known about your success. The question I'd been expecting allowed me to finally address years of accumulated hurt with adult perspective. I did try to share things initially, I said carefully, but conversations about my work always seemed to get redirected to Tyler's college experience or Madison's activities. After a while, it felt easier to just handle my professional life separately. Tyler flinched at the subtle reference to the family's attention priorities. Even Madison seemed to understand that something significant was being discussed, though the complexities were beyond her 13-year-old perspective. "We want to know now," my mother said urgently. "Tell us everything. We want to understand what you've built." The desperation in her voice was painful to hear, especially since it had taken a helicopter landing and an 8-figure fortune to generate genuine interest in my life. Over the next hour, I found myself explaining the business Alexander and I had created, describing the technology I'd developed and the market we'd captured. My family listened with rapt attention, asking questions that revealed how little they'd understood about my capabilities or ambitions. Alexander contributed details when appropriate, but primarily served as a witness to my accomplishments, his presence lending credibility to achievements my family might otherwise have struggled to believe. His obvious respect and affection for me created a new dynamic where my parents suddenly saw me through external eyes rather than their own limiting assumptions. As the evening progressed, the practical implications of my changed circumstances became impossible to ignore. "Where will you live now?" my mother asked. "I mean, if you accept this acquisition offer." "We haven't decided about the offer yet," I replied. "But regardless, I'll probably stay in the San Francisco area. That's where most of our industry connections are, and Alexander's companies are all based there." The casual reference to our industry connections and Alexander's multiple companies added additional layers to their growing understanding of my new world. "You could buy this entire neighborhood," Tyler said suddenly, his voice filled with awe and perhaps some regret, as he realized how his treatment of me might appear in this new context. "Material possessions aren't the goal," Alexander interjected gently. "The goal is creating value and building something meaningful. Sophia understands that instinctively, which is why she's been so successful." His comment revealed values that transcended simple wealth accumulation, suggesting depth beyond mere financial achievement. As midnight approached, Alexander glanced at his watch with practiced discretion. "I should let you all get back to your Christmas evening," he said, standing with the easy grace of someone comfortable in any social situation. "It's been wonderful finally meeting everyone." My mother stood quickly, her social instincts kicking in despite her continued emotional confusion. "You're welcome to stay," she offered, though we all knew there was no guest accommodation that would meet Alexander's likely standards. "We could make arrangements." "That's very kind," he replied diplomatically, "but I have early meetings tomorrow, and the helicopter pilot needs to return tonight." He turned to me with a questioning look. "Sophia, would you like to come back to the city with me? We could continue discussing the acquisition terms." The offer hung in the air like a test, though I wasn't sure who was being tested. My family watched anxiously as I considered the choice between staying in the garage for the remainder of Christmas vacation or leaving with the man who'd just revealed my secret success to people who'd never bothered to ask about it. "I think I'd like that," I said finally. "Let me get my things." As I headed toward the garage to collect my belongings, I heard my mother's voice behind me, smaller and more vulnerable than I'd heard it in years. "Sophia, wait." I turned to find her standing uncertainly in the doorway, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I'm sorry. We're sorry. We didn't know how to support something we didn't understand, but that's not an excuse for not trying harder to understand." The apology was imperfect but genuine, acknowledging failure without making excuses. It wasn't enough to immediately repair years of dismissal and favoritism, but it was a beginning. "I know," I said simply. "We'll figure it out." As I packed my few belongings, I could hear animated conversation from the living room, where my family peppered Alexander with questions about business, technology, and what life was like for someone who casually traveled by helicopter. 20 minutes later, as the aircraft lifted off from my childhood neighborhood, I looked down at the house where I'd spent Christmas mornings sleeping next to paint cans. The lights in the windows seemed smaller from above. The problems that had felt overwhelming just hours earlier reduced to manageable scale by altitude and perspective. "How do you feel?" Alexander asked over the helicopter's headset communication system, his voice warm with concern and affection. "Free," I replied honestly, watching the suburban landscape give way to city lights as we flew toward a future that belonged entirely to me. "I feel free." 3 months later, after accepting the acquisition offer and officially becoming worth $34 million, I received a carefully written letter from my mother, apologizing more thoroughly for years of misunderstanding and requesting a chance to rebuild our relationship on more honest terms. Tyler sent an awkward but sincere text acknowledging his past behavior and asking for advice about actually finishing college. Even Madison, now fascinated by having a tech entrepreneur sister, called regularly to ask questions about computers and business. The garage sleeping incident had become a family story, though now it was told with shame rather than casual dismissal. More importantly, it had forced conversations about favoritism, attention, and the cost of taking people for granted based on outdated assumptions. Alexander and I never did define our relationship in conventional terms, but our partnership, both business and personal, continued to thrive. 6 months after that Christmas evening, we started a new company together. This one focused on developing technology solutions for underestimated entrepreneurs from non-traditional backgrounds. People see potential differently when they're not limited by their own narrow definitions of success, Alexander explained when describing our mission to a business magazine. Sophia taught me that the most revolutionary innovations often come from people whose perspectives aren't constrained by conventional expectations. The interview ran with a photo of us in our new office, surrounded by the awards and recognition my work had earned over the past year. My parents framed a copy of the magazine and kept it prominently displayed in their living room, though I suspected it served more as a reminder of their misjudgment than simple pride in my accomplishments. On last Christmas, exactly 1 year after the helicopter incident, I visited my family again. This time, Madison had voluntarily moved to the guest bedroom, leaving my childhood room available for my stay. The gesture was small but significant, representing a shift in how I was perceived and valued within the family structure. As we sat around the Christmas tree that now included decorations I'd brought from my own collection, Tyler asked the question that had clearly been on his mind for months. "Do you think you'll ever forgive us for how we treated you?" I considered the question carefully, looking around at faces that showed genuine remorse and nascent respect, rather than the casual dismissal I'd grown accustomed to. "I think forgiveness is less important than moving forward with better understanding," I replied finally. "We can't change what happened, but we can choose how we treat each other going forward." The answer satisfied everyone, though I suspected each family member interpreted it differently based on their own guilt and hope for redemption. What mattered was that we were finally having honest conversations about our relationships, rather than maintaining polite fictions that served no one. That evening, as Alexander's helicopter arrived to take us back to the city, though this time by invitation rather than rescue, my mother hugged me with genuine warmth. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "Not because of your success, but because of who you've become despite how we failed to support you." The distinction was important, acknowledging that my worth wasn't dependent on external achievements, but recognizing that I'd thrived without the foundation most children expect from their families. It was perhaps the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. Have you ever been underestimated by the people closest to you, only to succeed beyond their wildest imagination? Sometimes the greatest motivation comes from those who believe in us least. Drop a comment sharing your own story of proving doubters wrong, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of resilience, success, and sweet redemption. Remember, your value isn't determined by others' ability to see it, but there's nothing quite like the moment when they finally do.